Marcus Blackwood froze in the doorway of his own restaurant, blood draining from his face. The sobbing waitress clutching a crumpled letter wasn't just any employee, she was Elise, the daughter he'd abandoned 23 years ago when he fled his responsibilities as a teenage father. She had no idea who he was, but he recognized her instantly from the distinctive birthmark on her wrist, identical to his mother's. How could fate be this cruel, bringing his greatest shame directly into his empire? The letter in Elise's trembling hands was an eviction notice. Between her mother's mounting medical bills and her own student loans, she was about to lose everything. Marcus overheard her whispering to another server that she'd taken this third job hoping to save their apartment, but it was too late. The irony crushed him. The man worth billions couldn't even provide a roof for his own flesh and blood. Worse still, the manager was berating her for crying during her shift, threatening termination if she didn't pull herself together. "That's enough," Marcus said, stepping forward. The manager's face paled upon recognizing the CEO who rarely visited this location. "Sir, I didn't know you were coming today. Give her the rest of the day off. With pay." Marcus couldn't tear his eyes from Elise's face, her mother's eyes, his grandmother's chin. The crushing weight of 2 decades of absence threatened to buckle his knees. How could he possibly reveal himself now? What right did he have to enter her life after all this time? Elise wiped her tears, embarrassed by the attention from the well-dressed stranger. "I'm fine, really. I need this shift." Her voice carried the same quiet determination he recognized in himself, the stubborn pride that had helped him build his restaurant empire from nothing. "Please, take the day. Sometimes we all need a moment to regroup." He handed her his business card, not his CEO card with the company logo, but his personal one with just his name and number. "If you need anything, call me." She studied the card suspiciously. "Why would a stranger care about my problems?" "Perhaps I'm not as much of a stranger as you think," he replied, immediately regretting the cryptic response. 23 years of guilt couldn't be undone with vague hints and charity. He needed a plan. Over the next week, Marcus discreetly arranged for Elise's mother's medical bills to be paid by an insurance correction. He created a scholarship fund that randomly selected Elise to receive full student loan forgiveness. He even had his real estate division discover an administrative error that cancelled her eviction and locked in affordable rent for 5 years. All anonymous, all untraceable to him. But the deception was eating him alive. Each night, he stared at old photographs of himself and Elise's mother, Sarah, high school sweethearts whose relationship couldn't survive his ambition. He'd convinced himself they were better off without him. Now, seeing Elise struggle despite his secret help, he realized money couldn't replace presence. The truth had to come out. Marcus returned to the restaurant, this time as a customer in Elise's section. She didn't recognize him from their brief encounter. He was just another wealthy patron to her. But as she served his meal, he noticed the small things, how she remembered every detail without writing it down, how she treated the busboy with genuine kindness, how her smile never quite reached her eyes. She was surviving, not living. "You seem better than last week," he ventured. Her eyes widened with recognition. "Oh, you're the man who sent me home." "Yes, things have improved, actually. Some strange coincidences have made my problems disappear." Her voice held suspicion. "Almost too convenient." "Sometimes the universe aligns in our favor," he offered weakly. "The universe doesn't pay off specific medical bills with exact amounts," she countered. "Someone's been helping me, and I don't know why." The moment had come sooner than he'd planned. Marcus took a deep breath. "Elise, there's something I need to tell you about your father." Her face hardened instantly. "I don't have a father." "Everyone has a father, biologically speaking. Mine chose not to be one." Her voice was ice. "He left before I was born. My mother raised me alone while working 3 jobs. He doesn't get to be part of the conversation. Marcus felt each word like a physical blow. What if he regretted his choice every day for 23 years? What if he was young and terrified and made the worst mistake of his life? Elise's hands began to shake. Why are you saying these things? Who are you? Before Marcus could answer, the restaurant's fire alarm blared. Smoke poured from the kitchen as staff and customers rushed toward the exits. In the chaos, Elise was separated from Marcus, swept away by the crowd. By the time the false alarm was resolved, just a minor cooking mishap, she had disappeared, her shift abandoned. For days, Marcus couldn't find her. She'd quit without notice, her phone disconnected, her apartment vacant despite the renewed lease. His private investigators came up empty. It was as if she'd vanished, slipping through his fingers just as he'd found her. Then came the email to his personal account, "I know who you are. Meet me at Riverside Park, Sunday at noon. Come alone." Sunday arrived with ominous storm clouds. Marcus found Elise sitting on a bench overlooking the water, her mother beside her. Sarah, older now, bearing the marks of her illness, but unmistakably the woman he'd once loved with his whole heart. "Marcus Blackwood," Sarah said quietly. Still making dramatic entrances. "You knew it was me helping Elise?" "Not until she described you. Some things don't change in 23 years. Elise stood, anger radiating from her rigid posture. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or just keep playing God with my life from a distance?" "I wanted to find the right moment. There is no right moment to say, I abandoned you before birth, but now I'm a billionaire who wants to ease his conscience." Elise's voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like growing up believing you weren't worth staying for?" The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. All his wealth, his empire of restaurants across 3 continents, his private jets and mansions, none of it could purchase what he'd thrown away. "I can't change the past," he said quietly. "I was 18, terrified, convinced I had nothing to offer either of you. By the time I'd built something worthwhile, years had passed, and I told myself it was too late." "It was never about what you could give us," Sarah interjected. "It was about being present. That's all we needed." Rain began to fall, but none of them moved. 23 years of absence couldn't be resolved in a single conversation, but it was a beginning. Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not just his mistakes but his chance at redemption. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't even expect a relationship. But I want you to know who you are. Half of your DNA comes from me, which means you're heir to everything I've built. Not because I'm trying to buy your affection, but because it's your birthright." Elise laughed bitterly. "You think I want your money? Your restaurants? Your empire built while my mother worked herself sick to raise me?" "No," Marcus replied. "I think you want the truth. And the truth is, I've spent 2 decades building a legacy for a family I didn't have. The restaurants, the success. It was all empty without someone to share it with. Without you." The rain intensified, soaking them to the skin. Thunder cracked overhead as Elise stepped toward him, her expression unreadable. "I have one question," she said. "Just one. Anything. Did you ever love her? Did you ever love me, even before I was born?" Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls crumble. "Loving your mother was the purest thing I've ever done. And the thought of you. It terrified me because I loved the idea of you so much I couldn't bear to fail you. So I ran." It was cowardice disguised as practicality. Something shifted in Elise's eyes, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out his business card, now worn at the edges. "I kept this. I don't know why. Perhaps," Sarah suggested gently, "because deep down, we all want to know where we come from." 3 months later, Marcus stood nervously outside his flagship restaurant. Inside, Elise waited, not as a waitress this time, but as his invited guest. Their weekly dinners had become a tentative tradition, a careful rebuilding of what had never been built in the first place. He'd offered her anything: money, connections, a place in his company. She'd refused it all, insisting on making her own way. But she had accepted one thing: his story. Each week, he shared another piece of himself, his journey, the family history that was rightfully hers to know. Tonight was different. Tonight, he would show her the papers transferring 25% of his company into her name, not as a gift, but as an acknowledgement of her rightful place. She could do with it what she wished: sell it, donate it, use it to start something of her own. The choice would be hers. As he reached for the door, his phone buzzed with a text from Elise. Running late. Mom's treatment ran long. Start without me? Marcus froze. Sarah's cancer had returned, more aggressive than before. The experimental treatments were promising but grueling. He'd spared no expense, bringing in specialists from around the world, but some things couldn't be solved with money. He texted back, "Where are you? I'll come to you." Her response was immediate: hospital. Room 302. 30 minutes later, Marcus entered the hospital room to find Sarah asleep, Elise holding her hand. The strong, vibrant woman who had raised their daughter alone looked fragile against the white sheets. "The doctors say it's spreading," Elise whispered. "They're not optimistic." Marcus sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "I have connections. Other treatments, trials in Europe. She's tired, Marcus. She's been fighting her whole life." Elise's voice broke. "First to raise me alone, now this. Maybe it's time to let her rest." The weight of those words, the years of struggle he could have eased, the burden he'd left on Sarah's shoulders, crushed him anew. "I should have been there. For both of you. You're here now," Elise said simply. "That counts for something." Sarah stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "You missed your dinner," she murmured. "Some things are more important than dinner," Marcus replied, taking her other hand. Sarah smiled weakly. After all these years, Marcus Blackwood finally has his priorities straight. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the scent of antiseptic, something shifted between the three of them. Not forgiveness exactly, that would take more time, but acceptance. The acknowledgement that the past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. 6 months later, they stood together at Sarah's memorial service. Against all odds, she had rallied, enjoying one final summer with her daughter and the man who had returned too late but just in time. Her final request had been simple: build something together. Something that matters. And so they did. The Sarah Blackwood Foundation opened its doors 1 year to the day after her passing. Not a charity, but a force for change, providing single parents with education, housing, and the support Marcus had failed to give Sarah all those years ago. Elise stood at the podium, her father beside her, as she addressed the crowd. "My mother used to say that life gives us second chances in unexpected packages. Mine came in the form of a billionaire walking into a restaurant at exactly the wrong moment, or perhaps exactly the right one." She turned to Marcus, their resemblance now unmistakable to anyone who saw them together. "We can't change our beginnings, but we can choose our endings. This foundation isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating a future where other families might find their way back to each other before it's too late." As they cut the ribbon together, Marcus realized that his true legacy wasn't the restaurant empire he'd built, but the daughter who had found it in her heart to let him try again. Not all stories have perfect endings, but some have meaningful ones. If this story touched you, remember that second chances are all around us, waiting to be recognized. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us it's never too late to make things right. The foundation's first year exceeded all expectations, with over 500 families receiving support that changed their trajectories forever. What began as Marcus's attempt at atonement evolved into something far more profound, a genuine partnership between father and daughter who, despite their complicated beginning, discovered they shared not just DNA but a vision for helping others avoid their painful path. On the anniversary of the foundation's opening, Elise found Marcus alone in his office, staring at an old photograph of Sarah from their high school days. "She was wearing my Letterman jacket," he explained without looking up. "It was the day before senior prom. I had no idea then that within a year, everything would change." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" Elise asked, settling into the chair across from him. Marcus finally met her gaze. "Every day for 23 years. I imagined a small apartment, community college at night, working multiple jobs. I told myself I spared you both from poverty, but the truth is, I spared myself from struggle." He carefully returned the photo to his wallet. "What I never imagined was that success without family would feel so hollow." Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted. Not the easy bond of a father who had been present since birth, but something more deliberate, built on conscious choices and hard conversations. They disagreed often, their similar temperaments clashing over foundation decisions, but there was respect underlying every argument. During one particularly heated debate about eligibility requirements for the foundation's housing program, Marcus finally recognized the steel in his daughter that had made his own success possible. "You're more like me than either of us wants to admit," he said with reluctant admiration. Elise's expression softened unexpectedly. "Mom used to say that. She'd say, when you dig your heels in like that, you're all Blackwood." She paused, considering. "I used to hate hearing it. Now, I'm not so sure." The foundation's work brought them to communities Marcus had never visited despite building restaurants in those same cities. In the South Bronx, he watched Elise connect effortlessly with young single mothers, offering not just resources but genuine understanding. "You have a gift," he told her afterward. "These women trust you." "Because I'm not just throwing money at them," she replied. "I'm seeing them. Really seeing them." The unspoken accusation hung between them, that he had failed to see Sarah, to see the value in what they could have built together. On a rain-soaked Tuesday, exactly 2 years after their first meeting at the restaurant, Elise arrived at Marcus's office unannounced. She carried a small, wrapped package and an expression he couldn't quite read. "I found this while going through Mom's things," she said, placing the package on his desk. "She kept it all these years. I think she would want you to have it." Inside was a sonogram, yellowed with age, the edges worn from handling. May 12, 1999. The first image of Elise, captured when Sarah was just 5 months pregnant. On the back, in Sarah's handwriting, "For Marcus, if he ever comes back to us." "She never stopped believing you might return," Elise said quietly. "Even when she told me to stop waiting, she never completely gave up hope herself." Marcus traced the fuzzy outline of the child he'd never seen grow up. "I don't deserve this." "It's not about deserving," Elise replied. "It's about belonging. This is part of your story too." That night, Marcus made a decision. The following morning, he called an emergency board meeting and announced his intention to step down as CEO of his restaurant group. "I've spent my life building something I thought would fill the hole inside me," he told the shocked executives. "It's time I focused on rebuilding what really matters." The transition wasn't smooth. Business publications speculated wildly about his sudden departure. Competitors circled, sensing weakness. The stock temporarily plummeted. But for the first time in his adult life, Marcus wasn't defined by his company's performance. Instead, he threw himself into the foundation work, learning from Elise rather than directing her. He sat in on support groups for absent parents trying to reconnect with their children, humbling himself to listen to stories that mirrored his own failures. Some nights, he returned home so emotionally drained he could barely speak, the weight of so many broken families, including his own, pressing down on him. "Is it worth it?" Elise asked him once, finding him staring blankly out his apartment window at 2 a.m. "Facing all this pain?" "More worth it than anything I've ever done," he answered without hesitation. On Elise's 30th birthday, a milestone Sarah hadn't lived to see, Marcus presented her with a leather-bound journal. "What's this?" she asked, opening to find blank pages. "The future," he replied simply. "Whatever you want it to be. I've spent too much time dwelling on what we lost. I want to focus on what we might still build." Elise ran her fingers over the empty pages. "You know, for years I had this recurring dream. I'd be sitting at a table in a restaurant, not one of yours, just some nameless place. Across from me would be a shadow where a father should be. I could never see his face." She looked up at Marcus, really looked at him. "I don't have that dream anymore. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. Some wounds run too deep for perfect healing. But it was acceptance. Acknowledgement that broken beginnings don't dictate endings. That sometimes, the longest journeys lead us right back to where we should have been all along." As the foundation expanded to 12 cities across the country, Marcus and Elise found themselves traveling together frequently, using these long flights and drives to fill in the missing chapters of each other's lives. On a cross-country flight to open their Seattle location, Elise finally asked the question she'd been avoiding for 3 years. "Were there others? Other women, other, possible children after you left Mom?" Marcus set down his tablet, giving the question the gravity it deserved. "No. There were relationships, but nothing lasting. I told myself I wasn't built for family." He hesitated. "The truth was, I couldn't replicate what I'd had with your mother. Everything else felt hollow." Elise nodded, absorbing this. "She never remarried either." Men asked, good men who would have been kind to us both. She always said her heart wasn't available. The weight of these parallel lives. Sarah and Marcus, separated by choice yet still bound by an invisible thread, settled between them. So much wasted time, so many moments that could never be reclaimed. On Elise's 32nd birthday, Marcus surprised her with keys to a small cottage on the lake where he and Sarah had spent their last summer together before everything fell apart. "This is where I asked her to marry me," he admitted. "She said we were too young, that we should wait. I took it as rejection instead of wisdom." Elise walked through the renovated cottage, running her fingers along walls that had witnessed the beginning of her parents' story. In the main bedroom, Marcus had hung a photograph, Sarah and himself as teenagers, laughing by the water's edge, unaware of the challenges ahead. "I had this blown up from an old negative I found," he explained. I thought you might want to see us as we were. Before mistakes and regrets. When there was just love." Elise studied the image. Her mother's carefree smile, her father's protective arm around Sarah's shoulders. "We could have been happy," she said softly. "The 3 of us." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "We could have been." That night, sitting on the dock as sunset painted the lake in amber and gold, Elise shared her own news. "I've met someone," she said. "His name is David. He's a pediatrician at the children's hospital where we opened the Foundation's Family Support Center." Marcus felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "Is he good to you?" "He is," she confirmed. "But I'm scared, Dad." The word still felt new on her tongue, used sparingly even after years of reconciliation. "What if I inherit your tendency to run when things get difficult?" Marcus considered this, watching a pair of loons glide across the water. "I don't believe fear is hereditary," he said finally. "And even if it were, you've already proven you're stronger than I ever was. You faced me, confronted me, allowed me back into your life despite every reason not to. That took more courage than I've ever shown." 6 months later, Marcus stood nervously in the back of a small chapel, watching Elise prepare to walk down the aisle alone. David waited at the altar, his expression a mixture of joy and reverence that reminded Marcus painfully of how he'd once looked at Sarah. Just before the music began, Elise turned to him. "I've been thinking," she said, smoothing her simple white dress. "About traditions. About fathers walking daughters down aisles." Marcus nodded, careful to keep his expression neutral. "It's your day. Whatever you want is perfect. The thing is," she continued, "you weren't there for my first steps. Or my first day of school. Or my graduation." Each milestone landed like a gentle accusation. "But you're here now. And maybe that counts for something too." She extended her arm, an invitation rather than an obligation. "I think Mom would approve. She always believed in second chances." As they moved slowly down the aisle together, Marcus felt the weight of every absent year, but also the precious gift of this moment, undeserved yet freely given. When they reached the altar and the minister asked, "Who gives this woman?" Marcus found his voice steady as he answered, "Her mother's memory and her father's heart." The foundation's 5th anniversary coincided with the birth of Elise and David's daughter. They named her Sarah, of course, but her middle name, Marceline, came as a surprise that left Marcus speechless when he first held his granddaughter. "Don't mess this one up," Elise told him with a smile that held no malice. "You get to be there from the beginning this time." And he was. Board meetings were scheduled around ballet recitals. Business trips were cut short to make it back for school plays. The man who had once abandoned his own child became the grandfather who never missed a moment, who built pillow forts in his penthouse and learned to braid hair despite his corporate manicure. On Sarah Marceline's 7th birthday, as the family gathered at the lake cottage that had become their traditional retreat, Marcus found himself alone with his granddaughter on the dock. She had her mother's determination and her grandmother's gentle eyes. "Grandpa," she asked, dangling her feet in the water, "why do you look sad sometimes when you think no one's watching?" Children's perception never failed to humble him. "Sometimes I remember mistakes I made a long time ago," he answered honestly. "Times when I wasn't as brave as I should have been." She considered this with the solemn wisdom of childhood. "Mom says everybody makes mistakes. The important part is fixing them." "Your mom is very wise," Marcus replied. "She says she gets that from you," Sarah Marceline added, leaning against his shoulder. That evening, as the extended family, David's parents, Elise's cousins from Sarah's side, the close-knit circle they'd built, gathered around the fire pit, Marcus watched his daughter across the flames. The flickering light caught the planes of her face, highlighting how much she resembled both her parents. The best of both of them, he thought, without the weaknesses that had driven them apart. Elise met his gaze and raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, exactly, some things remain too profound for simple absolution, but acceptance. Understanding. Perhaps even love, of a kind neither of them could have imagined that day in the restaurant when a billionaire CEO found a waitress in tears and recognized his greatest failure and his last chance at redemption. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Elise found Marcus on the porch, watching stars reflect on the still water. "I found something in Mom's old journals," she said, settling beside him. "Something she wrote just before she died." She handed him a page, carefully removed from a bound book. Sarah's handwriting, weaker than he remembered but unmistakable. "If Marcus ever reads this, tell him I understand now. We were too young, too unprepared. The path we took was harder, but perhaps it was the one we needed. Elise became stronger without him. I became more than I thought possible. And Marcus, he built something remarkable, even if it was empty at its heart. Tell him I forgive him. Tell him it's time he forgives himself." Marcus folded the page carefully, returning it to Elise. "Did you," he asked, "become stronger without me?" "I'll never know the alternative," she answered honestly. But I know who I am now. And I know that every part of my story, even the painful beginnings, made me this person. She took his hand, a gesture that had once been unimaginable between them. We can't rewrite the past, Dad. But we've done a pretty good job with the sequel. As dawn broke over the lake, father and daughter sat in companionable silence, watching the first light touch the water. Not the story either would have chosen, but theirs nonetheless, broken, mended, and ultimately, redemptive. The years flowed like the lake waters near their family cottage, sometimes calm, occasionally turbulent, but always moving forward. As Sarah Marceline grew from a precocious 7-year-old into a thoughtful teenager, the relationship between Marcus and Elise continued to evolve, deepening in ways neither had anticipated when they first reconnected. On Sarah Marceline's 13th birthday, Marcus presented her with a leather-bound business journal, similar to the one he'd used when building his restaurant empire. "For your thoughts, your dreams, your plans," he told her. "Whatever they may be. Are you trying to turn my daughter into a mini-mogul?" Elise teased later, though her tone held no real criticism. "I'm trying to give her tools I wish someone had given me," Marcus replied. Without the pressure to become anything specific. He hesitated. "When I was building the business, I convinced myself I was doing it for you and Sarah, creating something worthy of returning to you both. But that was a lie I told myself. I was running from my fears, not toward any noble goal." Elise studied her father, the silver now dominant in his once dark hair, the lines etched around his eyes speaking of both success and regret. "You know what Mom told me once? She said everyone has their own timeline for growing up. Some people do it at 18, some at 30, some not until they're facing their own mortality. And some of us need to lose everything before we understand its value," Marcus added quietly. The foundation had expanded beyond their wildest expectations, now operating in 27 cities with a model that other organizations sought to replicate. What had begun as Marcus's attempt at atonement had become a movement, changing policies and perceptions around single parenthood and family reconciliation. On the 10th anniversary of the foundation's creation, they held a gala that brought together families who had been helped, donors who had contributed, and politicians who had championed their cause. As Marcus prepared to introduce Elise for the keynote address, he found himself momentarily overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them here. "You okay?" David asked, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of water. Over the years, his son-in-law had become not just family but a trusted friend, someone who understood the complicated dynamics without judgment. "Just thinking about how close I came to missing all of this," Marcus admitted. "One moment in a restaurant changed everything." "Elise calls it divine intervention," David said with a smile. "Though she'd never admit that to you directly." When Marcus took the stage, the applause was respectful but restrained. His role in the foundation was well known, as was the story of his absence from Elise's early life. He had never sought to rewrite that history or paint himself as anything other than what he had been, a man who had failed his family before finding his way back. 10 years ago, he began, I stood in a restaurant I owned but rarely visited and saw a young woman in tears. I didn't know then that she was my daughter, but something in me recognized her all the same." He paused, gathering himself. What followed was not an instant reconciliation. Not a Hollywood ending where past sins are immediately forgiven. Instead, it was the beginning of the hardest, most rewarding work of my life. From the front row, Elise watched her father with an expression that had softened over the years from wariness to understanding to something approaching love. Beside her, Sarah Marceline, now a poised teenager with her grandmother's compassionate eyes, reached for her mother's hand. The Sarah Blackwood Foundation exists because one woman raised her daughter alone rather than settling for less than she deserved, Marcus continued. It exists because that daughter found the courage to face the father who had abandoned her. And it exists because sometimes, if we're very lucky, life gives us a chance to repair what we've broken. As he introduced Elise, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not for him, but for her. The girl who had grown up without a father's support had become a woman whose vision was changing thousands of lives. Marcus stepped back, content to remain in the wings as Elise took center stage. Later that night, as the family gathered at Marcus's penthouse apartment, Sarah Marceline approached her grandfather with uncharacteristic hesitation. At 13, she was navigating the complicated waters of adolescence, forming her own opinions about the family history she'd inherited. "I have a school project," she said, settling beside him on the balcony that overlooked the city lights. "About family trees and where we come from." Marcus nodded, waiting for the question he sensed was coming. "Everyone knows the story, about you leaving Grandma Sarah, about finding Mom at the restaurant." She twisted a bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Elise on her last birthday. "But no one ever talks about your parents." "My great-grandparents." "Who were they?" The question caught Marcus off guard. In all the years of reconciliation with Elise, of building their new relationship, his own childhood had rarely been discussed. "That's a fair question," he said finally. "And one I should have addressed long ago." Inside, he retrieved an old photo album he'd kept locked away for decades. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed with age. "My father left when I was 6, he began, opening to the first page. "My mother raised me alone, working 2 jobs to keep us afloat." Sarah Marceline studied the faded photographs, a young woman with Marcus's determined jaw, a small boy with serious eyes. "You were abandoned too," she said softly, the realization dawning. "I was," Marcus acknowledged. "Which makes what I did to your mother even less excusable. I knew exactly how it felt, yet I inflicted the same pain." "Did you ever find him? Your dad?" Marcus turned the page to reveal a newspaper clipping, an obituary dated 15 years earlier. Too late. He died alone in a nursing home 2 states away. I learned about it after the fact. Is that why you were so determined to find Mom? Because you never got closure with your own father? The insight from his teenage granddaughter struck Marcus deeply. Perhaps. Though I didn't make that connection at the time. He closed the album gently. The patterns we repeat are often invisible to us until someone else points them out. When Elise found them later, heads bent together over the album, something shifted in her understanding of her father. The man who had abandoned her had himself been abandoned. It didn't excuse his choices, but it placed them in a context she had never fully considered. "I never knew," she said, joining them. "I never told you," Marcus replied simply. It felt like making excuses. That night marked another turning point in their relationship, the beginning of a deeper understanding that extended beyond their shared history to the generations that had come before and would follow after. As Sarah Marceline entered high school, she began spending more time at the foundation, initially just observing but gradually taking on small responsibilities. Marcus watched with quiet pride as she inherited not just Elise's determination but also her compassion. "She reminds me of your mother," he told Elise one afternoon, watching Sarah Marceline patiently help a young single father navigate housing paperwork. "That same quiet strength. With a dash of your business sense," Elise added. "Yesterday she presented me with a 5-year plan for expanding the Foundation's youth programs, complete with budget projections." Marcus laughed. "Nature or nurture?" "Both, I think," Elise replied thoughtfully. "She's had what I didn't, the chance to know both sides of her heritage." The Foundation's work had evolved over the years, expanding beyond immediate support for single-parent families to address systemic issues. Advocating for policy changes, partnering with corporations to implement family-friendly practices, creating pathways for absent parents seeking reconciliation. On Sarah Marceline's 16th birthday, Marcus took her to the original restaurant where he had first encountered Elise. The location had been renovated, but he had preserved the section where that fateful meeting had occurred. "This is where our family story changed," he told her, showing her the exact spot. One moment, one choice to step forward instead of turning away. Sarah Marceline ran her hand along the back of a chair. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come in that day? If you'd visited a different restaurant in your chain? Every day, Marcus admitted. I built an empire based on the idea that I could control outcomes, predict markets, manage risk. But the most important moment of my life came down to pure chance. Being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to find what I didn't even know I was looking for. As they shared lunch in the private dining room, Sarah Marceline revealed her own news. I've been thinking about college, she said. About what I want to study. Marcus nodded, careful to keep his expression neutral. David and Elise had been clear from the beginning, their daughter would make her own choices, free from the weight of expectations from either family legacy. I want to study family law, she continued. Maybe eventually work with the foundation, helping create legal frameworks for family reunification. She met his gaze directly. Because of you and Mom. Because sometimes people deserve second chances. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Your grandmother would be very proud, he managed finally. As am I. The summer before Sarah Marceline left for college, the family gathered at the lake cottage for an extended stay. Marcus, now in his 60s, found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all to this point, the mistakes, the reconciliation, the building of something new from the ashes of what had been lost. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, Elise joined him on the dock. They sat in companionable silence, watching the light play across the water. I've been thinking about forgiveness, Elise said finally. About what it really means. Marcus turned to her, waiting. For years, I thought forgiveness meant saying what you did was okay. That abandoning us didn't matter. She traced patterns in the water with her toe. I couldn't do that, so I thought I couldn't forgive you. That's understandable, Marcus said quietly. But I've realized something, working with all these families at the foundation. Forgiveness isn't about the past at all. It's about choosing the future. She met his gaze directly. I forgive you, Dad. Not because what happened doesn't matter, but because what's happening now matters more. The words he had never expected to hear, had never felt he deserved, washed over Marcus like a benediction. Thank you, he whispered, unable to say more. As Sarah Marceline prepared to leave for college, Marcus found himself facing another transition. The foundation was thriving under Elise's leadership, his role increasingly that of advisor rather than director. The restaurant empire, now managed by a capable executive team, required little of his attention. What will you do with yourself? David asked good-naturedly, helping Marcus load Sarah Marceline's belongings into the car for the drive to campus. Take up golf? Buy a yacht? Marcus laughed. I was thinking of something a bit different, actually. He hesitated, still uncertain about the idea that had been forming. I've been approached about writing a book. About the foundation, about family reconciliation. And about your story, Elise added, joining them. Our story. Yes, Marcus acknowledged. Though I wanted to discuss that with you first. It would mean making public many things we've kept private. Elise considered this, leaning against the car. 10 years ago, I would have said no. I was still protecting myself, still uncertain about what we were building. She glanced toward the house, where Sarah Marceline was saying goodbye to the lake for the summer. But now? I think our story might help others. The messy, complicated truth of it. The book project became Marcus's focus over the next year, a process of excavating memories both painful and precious. He interviewed Elise for hours, recording her perspective on events he had missed and those they had experienced together. He spoke with Sarah's old friends, colleagues, neighbors, anyone who could help him understand the life his absence had shaped. The writing was excruciating at times, forcing him to confront the full impact of his choices in ways he had previously avoided. There were nights when he called Elise, voice thick with emotion, to apologize yet again for specific moments she had shared, her 5th birthday when she had waited by the window for a father who never came, her high school graduation when she had scanned the audience despite knowing better, the day she had given birth to Sarah Marceline and felt both joy and an echo of her mother's solitude. "I'm not telling you these things to hurt you," Elise assured him during one such call. "But if this book is going to matter, it has to be honest." When the manuscript was finally complete, Marcus sent copies to both Elise and Sarah Marceline before submitting it to the publisher. "Veto power," he explained. "Anything either of you wants removed, I'll remove without question." A week later, they gathered at the penthouse to discuss their responses. Sarah Marceline, home from college for the weekend, spoke first. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "Painful and real and beautiful." Elise nodded agreement. "There's only one thing missing," she said, sliding a folder across the table to Marcus. Inside was a collection of entries from Sarah's journals, thoughts she had recorded about Marcus over the years, from the early days of anger and abandonment through her illness and, finally, her acceptance. "She would want these included," Elise said quietly. "Her voice should be part of the story too." The book, titled The Taste of Redemption, A Father's Journey Back, was published the following spring to critical acclaim and unexpected commercial success. What had begun as a personal reckoning became a cultural conversation about family, forgiveness, and the possibility of second chances. Marcus donated all proceeds to the foundation, establishing a new program specifically focused on helping absent parents navigate the difficult path of reconnection. The program was named for Sarah. Not as the founder's mother, but as the woman whose capacity for eventual forgiveness had made everything else possible. As Sarah Marceline progressed through college, excelling in her studies and already making connections in family law, Marcus found himself contemplating his own mortality with a peace he had never expected to find. The heart condition that had troubled him for years was worsening, though he kept the severity from Elise and her family. On Sarah Marceline's 21st birthday, he presented her with a small velvet box. Inside was a key. "To the cottage," he explained. "I've put it in your name. It's where your grandparents fell in love, where your mother and I began to find our way back to each other. It should belong to the future of this family, not its past." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Elise found her father on the balcony, his breathing slightly labored as he gazed out at the city lights. "How bad is it?" she asked directly, her intuition as sharp as ever. Marcus smiled ruefully. "Bad enough. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment." Elise absorbed this, her expression shifting from shock to determination. "Have you gotten other opinions?" "There are specialists." "I've seen the best," he assured her. "Some things can't be fixed, only managed." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not afraid, Elise. I've had more than I deserve, these years with you, with Sarah Marceline. The chance to try to make things right." "It's not enough time," she protested, voice breaking. "We just found each other." "And that's the miracle," he replied gently. "That we found each other at all. The months that followed were precious beyond measure." Marcus stepped back from all professional obligations, focusing entirely on family. He attended Sarah Marceline's college debates, spent weekends at the cottage with Elise and David, recorded hours of conversations about family history, business insights, and personal philosophy, leaving behind not just material legacy but wisdom. As his strength waned, Marcus made one final request: a family dinner at the original restaurant, at the exact table where he had first encountered Elise all those years ago. "Full circle," he explained when Elise questioned whether he was strong enough for the outing. The evening was everything he had hoped, filled with laughter, memories, and a depth of connection that once would have seemed impossible. Sarah Marceline shared her plans for law school, her vision for expanding the foundation's legal advocacy. David discussed the pediatric research he was pioneering. Elise spoke of new initiatives, new cities requesting foundation chapters. Marcus listened to it all with profound gratitude, occasionally catching Elise's eye across the table, silent acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them here. As the evening drew to a close, he raised his glass in a toast. To second chances, he said simply. And to Sarah, who made them possible. 3 weeks later, Marcus passed peacefully in his sleep, Elise holding one hand and Sarah Marceline the other. The man who had once run from responsibility died surrounded by the family he had nearly lost forever. The funeral drew hundreds, foundation beneficiaries, business associates, political allies, and most importantly, families who had found their own paths to reconciliation inspired by the